We are about to look at 5. Okay, 2 seconds are over. Approximately no time. 2 seconds. When you say 2 seconds, approximately no time. So let us go to 5. Okay, 5 says, okay, the footballers and the athletes. The footballers and the athletes train our students. The footballers and the athletes train our students. So under that structure, you underline footballers. When you underline footballers, you point your arrow downward in the second line, the third line, you write your S2. So we have footballers as our S2 there. And then we have athletes, okay? That is that those who engage in track events, okay? And then we have athletes. You underline athletes. When you underline athletes, you point your arrow downward in the second and the third line. You write your S2. So we have athletes as our V2. Okay. So we have field event participants that's full of footballers, and we have footballers, basketballers, and we have athletes. That is track events participants. Okay. So there we have S2 and S2, and then we have train our students. Okay, under that structure, train our students, you underline train. When you underline train, you point your arrow downward in the second line, the third line, you write your V2. So you have train as our V2. So there you can see we have S2 and S2, and it has taken train as our V2, which is very, very good like that. And then we have it is wrong for you to say the footballers and the athletes trains our students. If you say that, it means your S2 and S2 have taken V1, which is wrong. That is train with S. It's wrong there. Therefore, the correct form remains the footballers and the athletes train our students. On the other hand, you can briefly say they train our students. If you say that, it means you've taken the third person plural pronoun, and it has agreed with train, which is also the third person plural verb. Okay, and then we have example 6. Example 6 says, ladies and gentlemen give you their full support. Ladies and gentlemen give you their full support. So under that structure, you underline ladies. Okay, when you underline ladies, you point your arrow downward in the second line, the third line, you write your S2. So you have ladies as our S2. And then we have gentlemen. You underline gentlemen. When you underline gentlemen, you point your arrow downward in the second line, the third line, you write your S2. So we have ladies as S2, and then we have gentlemen as S2. And then we have the structure give you their full support. Under that structure, you underline give. When you underline give, you point your arrow downward in the second line, the third line, you write your V2. So you have give as our V2, okay? So it is wrong when you say ladies and gentlemen gives you their full support. If you say that, it means your S2 and S2 have taken V1, and that is very wrong. That's very wrong. That is wrong, okay? So that is wrong, okay? So the correct form remains ladies and gentlemen give you their full support. On the other hand, you can briefly say they give you their full support. If you say that, it means you've taken the third person plural pronoun, and it has agreed with give as a third person plural verb, okay? So we go to example 7, okay? Example 7 says, okay, cash crops and food crops are given less attention in Nigeria, okay? Cash crops and food crops are given less attention in Nigeria. Cash crops and food crops are given less attention in Nigeria. So under that structure, you underline cash crops. When you underline cash crops, you point your arrow downward in the second and the third line. You write your S2. So we have cash crops as our S2 here. And we have food crops again. So you underline food crops. And you underline food crops, you point your arrow downward in the second and the third line. You write your S2. So we have food crops as our S2. And then we have this structure giving less attention in Nigeria. Under that structure, you underline R. When you underline R, you point your arrow downward in the second and the third line. You write your V2. So we have R as our V2. It is therefore wrong when you say cash crops and food crops is given less attention in Nigeria. If you say that, it means your S2 and S2 have taken V1, which is wrong. The correct form remains cash crops and food crops are given less attention in Nigeria. Okay, so on the other hand, you can briefly say they are giving less attention in Nigeria. If you say that, it means you've taken the third person plural pronoun, and it has agreed with the verb have, okay, or are. which is a plural auxiliary verb. Okay, so it has agreed with are, which is plural auxiliary verb. So you go to our example 8. Example 8 says dogs and cats bite. Example 8 says dogs and cats bite. So under that structure, you underline dogs. When you underline dogs, you point your arrow downward in the second line. The third line, you write your S2. Okay, so we have dogs as our S2. And then we also have cats. You underline cats as well. When you underline cats, you point your arrow downward in the second line. The third line, I write your S2 again. So we have S2 and S2 there. And then we have our bites. Okay, so you underline bites. When you underline bites, you in the second, you draw arrow, you point your arrow downward in the second line, the third line, and in the third line you write your V2. So we have bite as our V2. So we have our S2 and S2 have taken bite as V2. Okay, it is therefore wrong when you say dogs and kites bites. If you say that, it means your S2 and S2 have taken V1. Okay, bite with S is a singular verb. Okay, so it is wrong when you say dog. Okay, when you say dogs and cats bite. Okay, the correct form of course remains dogs and cats bite. On the other hand, you can briefly say they bite. If you say they bite, it means you've taken the third person plural pronoun, and it has agreed with the bite as third person plural verb. So that is what we have for you today under our presentation. I believe you are enjoying it. We will meet in the next 24 hours from the telly. All right.